Church, as we continue to worship this morning, would you take your copy of God's Word, turn where we have been and where we will be in the months to come. That is John chapter 6 this morning. John chapter 6. We will pause in an Advent series, but as we come back into 2026, and we will continue to be in John. I love the book of John. I love the richness of John. John chapter 6, verses 16 through 21 are our guide this morning. I have a question for you. I wonder how many of you have bucket lists. You don't have to raise your hand here. I'm sure that many of you have a bucket list of places you want to go. I certainly have that. If you got a hold of my phone, you're probably not going to see an Apple Note that has David's bucket list of everything he wants to do this side of heaven. But there are mentally cities I want to visit, cities I would love to be able, Danielle and I, to be able to go to, or family to be able to go to. There are natural wonders that I certainly want to see. Baseball stadiums. Can I just be honest? This bucket list has got baseball stadiums I've got to get to. I had a bucket list, probably about 10, 15 years ago, that I was going to try to get to every minor league baseball stadium. That's an unrealistic goal. So I took that off the bucket list goal. But I mean, you get where I'm going, right? I mean, we all have different lists. I've got books that I want to read, meals I want to eat, hikes and trails that I want to go hiking on. I have races to run. I mean, we all have sort of a mental bucket list. But I tell you this, one thing that's not on that bucket list for me, and I do not mean this disparagingly to anyone here, that this is at the top of your bucket list, but at least for me in my house, a cruise is not on the list. It's just not. Now, I know that so many people love cruises, but for me, it doesn't matter if it's an Alaskan cruise, it doesn't matter if it's a Disney cruise, it doesn't matter if it's a Caribbean cruise. It's just never been something that's all that appealing to me for a variety of reasons, one of which I've done extensive research of all that can go wrong on a boat in the middle of the ocean. I have watched Titanic many times, and I've seen The Perfect Storm many times here. But look, hey, there is something about the wind and the waves and the storm in the midst of the ocean. Now, people tell me, hey, David, the boat is huge. You don't even feel it. You don't even feel the storms, but it has not changed my mind about this. And I would just say I'm in real good company with this. I'm in ancient company with this. When you go back to your Western Lit class in college and you're reading some of the great classics and you get a hold of Homer and Homer's Odyssey, and how does Homer talk about the sea? You know how he talks about it? He talks about it as the great unknown. He talks about it as a symbol of danger, the symbol of disaster and death. Now he does this, well, certainly in that nautical world of 8th century BC. I mean, to go out into the open sea is to oftentimes to put your life in the hands of Mother Nature and the uncertainty of the sea. It was something the disciples knew. First century in the ancient Near Eastern world, certainly we have disciples that are fishermen. Think of Simon Peter, think of Andrew, think of James, think of John. But they knew what it was to get on the Sea of Galilee and to have these, because of the topography of that area, to have these unexpected storms that would come out of nowhere and oftentimes be deadly and to be dangerous. The disciples knew what it was to have a holy respect for the sea. The disciples knew what it was to have a holy awe of the sea. The sea wasn't something that you just cavalierly went into. I mean, there's no James Spann meteorological reports that are going to lead you out there 2,000 years ago. There's no satellite weather radio that you have. So oftentimes the uncertainty of what could happen to you in the sea would be something that you should in that time fear, unless you've got one person on your boat. Don't just take my word for it. Hear the word of the Lord this morning in John chapter 6, verses 16 and following, a familiar story, a powerful story. The word of the Lord to us this morning from John chapter 6, starting in verse 16, reads, "When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then, verse 21, they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. This is the word of the Lord to us. It comes on the heels of one of the most famous miracle stories that we looked at last week, which is Jesus feeding the 5,000 plus. 5 loaves of bread, 2 small fish. 5,000 plus not only get their fill that day, but they have, 12 baskets of leftovers. What a miraculous provider Jesus is. So much so that these who were famished, who are now filled, they want to crown him. They want to crown him a Messiah who is going to ultimately be their ruler, that's going to overthrow the Roman Empire and the Roman government. If he can do these kinds of things, surely he would be a Messiah who could kick out Rome as they are oppressing the Jewish people of that day. That's what they wanted in Jesus. But Jesus refuses their crown. Now, he is going to wear a crown, but it is not going to be a crown of gold. It is going to be a crown of thorns, and he will be a conquering Messiah, but it is not going to be through military might, but it is going to be through his death, burial, and resurrection. He will be a conquering king, but not in the way that they want him to be. He retreats to the mountains. The text tells us that the disciples get into the boat. A good question is why in the middle of the night do they get into the boat to go to this place in Capernaum here? It's a good question. Thankfully, this isn't the only account in the Gospels. John gives us his account, but also Matthew and Mark give us an account. Mark fleshes out some of the details that help us understand this story, one of which is the motivation of the disciples. Why in the middle of the night do they get out into the boat here? Well, Mark tells us, chapter 6, verse 45, you see it on the screen here, immediately, he being Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. Jesus commanded them to get into the boat to row into the very eye of the storm. It's a really fascinating detail, isn't it? They don't go into the storm because of their foolishness. They don't go into their storm because of their disobedience. They go into the eye of the storm because they're being perfectly obedient to their Lord's command. It's a good reminder to us that the center of God's will for your life and my life is often in the eye of the storm. Do you know that? That the center of God's will is often in the eye of the storm for your life. It was for the disciples, and it oftentimes is for the disciples like you and me today. Growing up, when I was young, especially around Thanksgiving and Christmas, I would go see my maternal grandparents who were avid readers. They were avid collectors of books. Very few of their rooms didn't have floor-to-ceiling bookcases that were just crammed full of books. Growing up in Mississippi, the great Mississippi authors, I was first introduced like William Faulkner and Eudora Welty and Richard Wright and Alice Walker, Tennessee Williams. I would see them on the shelves there, but there was also another author, maybe I was 7 or 8 years old. It was a Thanksgiving week. It seems, if my memory serves me correctly, that it was the title of the book by Harold Kushner that drew my attention. When bad things happen to good people. I'm 8 years old. I don't understand the premise of that. I don't know the words of theodicy. How do we talk about a good God who allows evil in the world? But this is what this rabbi is getting to. It's a very popular book 30 or 40 years ago, and the premise of his book, which I certainly didn't understand when I first saw it. I got it because of the title of the book that piqued my curiosity. I got it, and I can still sort of remember what it looks like. I can still remember the smells of that book. But looking back upon it, his answer to that was wholly insufficient. He proposed that God is no doubt good, but he's not all-powerful. And he's unable to prevent all suffering. But take heart, he says, he's able to be with you and to help you endure it. That's the question of the book, though. When bad things happen to good people, why do bad things happen to good people? That question is a question that so many of us, we walk with in our life, do we not? And I have a feeling that many of us in the church, and certainly outside of the church, we have this false belief that if we live halfway decent lives, if we go to church, if we serve the Lord the best we can, of course, none of us can do this perfectly, but if we do this, we have this transactional view that God owes us something. And this is the current that many of us are swept up in, that if we serve Him, He owes us this immunity from the calamities of life. We want, as a reward of service, this force field that makes tornadoes go not down our road, but the next road or the next county, the next city, not ours. We want this force field that when diagnoses come our way, they roll off us. They roll off our family members and friends. But the Bible just will not have anything to do with that. From the book of Job to the book of Genesis to the life of Jesus Himself, the perfect incarnation of God, the God in the flesh walking with us, a perfect life and perfect obedience to God the Father. You know where that story ends. It ends with Him dying a cruel death upon a coarse Roman cross. I mean, if this can happen to the most perfect person, certainly trials and tribulations can come to me and you. Certainly we can be in the center of God's will as Jesus Himself was, and in the eye of the storm. Jesus tells us this in Matthew chapter 5. For He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good, and He sends rain on the just and the unjust. Don't believe the lie. Don't believe the lie of the prosperity gospel. Don't believe the lie that seeks to tell you that if you have difficulty in life, it is proof that you've wandered off the course of God's direction for your life. Don't believe the inverse lie that if you receive the common grace blessings of God in your life, that is always a one-to-one reward for your obedience in life. You can often be in the center of God's will for your life and in the direct eye of the storm. And here's the truth for the disciples. In the midst of the storm, they will behold the power of Jesus in a way that calm seas never would reveal. Jesus comes to them in the eye of the storm. John tells us that they're 3 to 4 miles into the journey here, most likely another 3 to 4 miles ahead of them in the journey here, and they see Jesus walking on the waves. John tells us, verse 19, do you see it? It's an understatement of understatements. They were frightened. There's a lot going on with this. There was a superstition 2,000 years ago in that ancient Near Eastern world that when storms occurred, there were evil spirits that would roam the land. And so when Mark tells us in his parallel account that they thought they saw a ghost, it's most likely because of that superstition that was floating around, that the storms were a time where evil spirits would roam the waters. They're exhausted. The wind is howling. It's dark in this moment here. The darkness is overcoming their own souls in this moment here, and it's no wonder that they're fearful. It's no wonder that they panicked in this moment, but they didn't realize that in this very moment, the very waves that frightened them were the very waves that were carrying their Savior toward them. That the chaos of the sea and the calamity of the sea, for them, was all uncertainty. For Jesus, it was a firm foundation for Him to walk on. This is the power of Jesus. It's revealed to us in His Word here, verse 20. It's real easy for us to pass it by and to think it's nothing more than Jesus just saying, hello, it's me. You read it, it is I, do not be afraid. We could skip past this too quickly, thinking it's just merely a designation, but it's so much more. In the original language of the New Testament, we have 2 Greek words, ego, emai, that are being used here that harken back all the way to Exodus chapter 3. One way to translate this is I am. Now, where have we heard that before? Well, of course you know. Moses is meeting God in the burning bush. Moses needs a little bit of designation. I need to, when I go back to Israel, when I go back to, Egypt and tell the people of God that God has told me to go to Pharaoh here, I need to be able to say who sent me here. And you remember, out of the burning bush, God says, I am that I am. Tell them that the great I am, that is translated in the Old Testament, Lord, it is the covenant name for God, Yahweh. And so here is Jesus showing up, and this is already just a little bit of a preview. We're going to have 7 I am statements, the first of which is coming right on the heels of this miracle story at the sea. And so here we have Jesus echoing the power of the greatest story in all of the Old Testament, the story of a God who is more powerful even than the Red Sea, with the Egyptians on their back and the sea before them. So it would be that God would be so powerful to part the sea. And here's Jesus walking on the sea. Here's Jesus saying, I am the eternal one. I am the one who is never absent. I am the one who's never surprised. I am the one who is never shaken. Jesus steps into the storm-tossed waters and declares to them, I am, revealing himself as the same God who told Moses, I will be with you. And now he's physically present in the midst of the storm, saying to the disciples, I am here. You do not have to be afraid. And so it was. The sea symbolized danger. The sea, we know, symbolizes the unknown. The sea symbolizes disaster and death here, and it's all under the feet of Jesus. The message is unmistakable. Here he is saying, I am. So you don't have to be afraid anymore. I am the one who comes to you in the storm. And when Jesus comes aboard the boat of the disciples, well, everything changes. We read it in verse 21. It's a powerful statement here. Then they were glad to take him into the boat. And John draws upon Mark's favorite word in his gospel and says, immediately. Mark, if you're reading through the gospel of Mark is immediately. And here John picks up this word and says, immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. What a verse. I mean, just ponder this for a second. It's real easy for us to just skip past verse 21 and to not take in the mystery of this verse and the beauty of this verse, the reminder of his majesty and power here. They're in the midst of the storm. They take Jesus onto their boat, and we read immediately this boat that's 3 to 4 miles into the sea is at the land where they're going. What in the world is going on here? Seems to be a miracle. How this miracle, if you had a front row seat there to what was going on, would you see the boat hydroplaning across the sea? Is that what's going? I don't know. Does Jesus press a divine fast forward button and time seems to speed up? I don't know. The best answer to all these questions that I can bring to you is simply, I do not know. Is John drawing upon a figure of speech? Maybe so. It doesn't seem like that's what he's doing. There seems to be something that is a powerful spiritual truth in the midst of this. Now, John doesn't clearly tell us what's going on, but can I make a suggestion? It's just a suggestion. There's some people in your life and my life that when you're with them, it seems as if time just speeds up. You have lunch with them, you have coffee with them. Imagine decades ago when you were dating your wife or your husband, and you go out to dinner and you would look up and 3 hours would go by and you would say something like, where did the time even go? The people you love, the people that bring joy to you, that has a way of speeding up time. That their presence with us has a way of affecting the way that we view the experiences of our life here. And maybe, just maybe, John is showing us something that when we're close to Jesus and we're abiding deeply with him, when he is in the boat of our lives here and present with us, even in the midst of the storms and struggles of life, they feel lighter. And ultimately, the destination is always closer. I mean, the disciples are at their wits' end. They've rowed and they've rowed and they've rowed, and that is not the answer to get them out of the storm. The only answer is Jesus with them in the midst of the storm. And when he comes on the boat, they get to their destination immediately. And what a truth to ponder. What a truth to ponder here this morning, that the nearness of Jesus, it always shortens the distance between fear and faith. In the storms of life, we're always having to make a decision. Are we going to be overwhelmed by the fear of the unknown? Or are we going to have faith in the one we trust and the one that loves us and comes to us in the midst of the storms? I don't think John has given us a geographical statement, first and foremost. I think he's given us a statement of how grace and how his Spirit actually work for us. That when the presence of Jesus is in the boat of your life, when you're abiding deeply with him, he doesn't always eliminate the storms of your life, and he doesn't, frankly, always even calm the storms of your life. But his presence with you always ensures your arrival at the shore of his peace. His presence with you always ensures your arrival at the shore of his purpose and the shore of his provision. Do you know that? Do you believe that? Have you lived that? Many of you have. I mean, one of the joys of being a pastor is to see how Christ is so present with his people in the midst of their storms. One of the joys that I have is a proximity to people in the midst of these kinds of testimonies, a proximity that I have a front row seat to his peace that surpasses all understanding. A week doesn't go by that I couldn't tell you a story like this. Just this last week, I stopped by UAB St. Vincent's to see one of our church members and their spouse there in the hospital. And I will go to the right of these details and I'll go to the left of these details. But here's the premise of what happens so often is a procedure that was intended to be just a normal procedure had a complication, and that complication led this couple to, well, a place of real stormy seas. It's real danger, real uncertainty. By the time I was there, not all of the questions were answered, and there was still uncertainty upon them. But when I got there and started talking with them, immediately, what they wanted to talk about was the way that they had sensed God's provision for them and his peace with them. His provision through family, his provision through really good doctors and nurses that were caring for them. Their provision through text messages and phone calls that they were receiving from people that are right here in this gym, even this morning. And here's the thing. The waves were still really big, and the wind was howling. There was real uncertainty for them, even in the midst of this, but their focus was a sense of peace. And their prayer, even as I was leaving here, as I left so encouraged, their prayer before I prayed with them was that this storm would be a part of their testimony of God's care, God's provision that is absolutely supernatural, that friends and family members would be able to see him at work in their lives. Now, there were real issues, but what got the first word and what got the last word was that Jesus was near to them in the boat of their life, in the boat of their marriage, and they were in the storm, but they might as well have been on the shore. This is the peace that surpasses all understanding. And when you trust fully in the one who holds you, even in the midst of your storm, you can understand that I cannot promise you shelter from the storms of your life. Jesus may not give you calm seas, but he always gives you his presence, his power, and his peace in the middle of them. And he may not remove you from the struggle, but he will always redeem the struggle in your life. When Jesus is close to you and near to you, when Jesus is in the boat of your life here, you can always be assured that his grace And his love will carry you along over the waves, through the wind, to the destination of your good and ultimately his glory. So if you find yourself this morning in the midst of the storm, or if you find yourself in calm seas with a storm maybe down the road, years ahead here, know this: take comfort in Jesus, that he still comes our way, that he still walks on the waves, that he is still sovereign even over the storms. The great I Am is with you, even in the midst of stormy seas, and he still offers his peace, his power, and his provision, because he is the great I Am. Let us pray.